Tonight, recession rears its ugly head. President Biden acknowledges the risk of a slight recession.
There's no guarantee that they're going to be. I don't think there will be a recession.
As measures of inflation persist at record high levels. Plus,
the president reacts to Russian attacks in Ukraine, killing civilians.
It's brutal. It's beyond the pale.
And
embryonic incentives. A new Georgia law gives soon-to-be parents a chance to claim unborn babies as dependents.
All this and more on Faith Nation.
The clearest signal yet that a recession may be looming. Welcome to Faith Nation from our News Bureau in Washington. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Abigail Robertson. Tonight, the president is acknowledging the economy may slip into a, quote, slight recession.
That first-time concession made during a televised interview comes as rates of inflation continue to soar.
President Biden was asked by CNN if Americans should prepare for a recession, and he said no, before saying an economic recession may be on the horizon.
Should the American people prepare for a recession?
No. Look, they've been saying this now. How every 6 months they say this. Every 6 months they look down the next 6 months and see what's going to happen. It hadn't happened yet. It hadn't. There's no guarantee that they're going to be. I don't think there will be a recession. If it is, it'll be a very slight recession.
Some economists worry the Federal Reserve's policy to combat inflation by raising interest rates may be overcorrecting, with some fearing a recession is imminent. The Producer Price Index out today shows a third straight decline, but inflation sticking at record high levels, rising 8.5% since this time last year.
And here with us now for more on our top story, Stephen Moore, chairman of FreedomWorks Task Force on Economic Revival. Stephen, it's always great to have you. Jamie Dimon, J.P. Morgan Chase's CEO, is among those who thinks a recession is in the offing. Stephen, if that is the case, do you agree with President Biden when he says it will be a slight recession?
You know, I laugh when I hear Jamie Dimon and Larry Summers and other economists say we might head to a recession. We're in a recession. Come on, we had the first 6 months of the year the economy contracted. That's the very definition of a recession. And I define this as a recession, a cost of living recession, where Americans are just getting pounded in terms of the inflation rate rising so much more rapidly than their wages. And so their paychecks are essentially shrinking month after month after month. They're about $4,000 poorer today than a year ago. Now, where we head from here, the real question is whether we're going to have a soft landing or a crash landing. And you've got all this massive amounts of trillions and trillions of dollars that the government has so erroneously spent. And now this money is into the economy, and the Fed is trying to pull it out of the economy, and that's going to probably slow down the economy somewhat. So I don't feel like we're in good shape. And don't forget, we're in the midst of an incredible bear market when it comes to stocks. So people's savings are diminishing as well.
So, Stephen, if you believe we're in a recession right now, what is your advice to the American people? What should they be doing?
Well, if you don't have a job, get one, because the jobs are out there. The one part of the economy that's healthy right now, Abigail, is the jobs market. I don't know how much longer that's going to last. You already hear signs of big companies starting to do layoffs, starting to do hiring freezes. And so, number one, get a job if you don't have one while they're still there. Number two, now is the time not to panic. I mean, we've seen a huge decline in the stock market in the last 18 months since Biden came into office, but you don't want to sell low. That breaks the first law of investing. So stick with it. I think we've got some tough times ahead, but 5 and 10 years from now, the stock market's going to be a lot higher than it is today.
So we know that the Fed has been trying to tamp down concerns with inflation. What about the concern that their interest rate hikes, which are designed to, again, tamp down inflation, are too forceful? Do you agree with that?
The most important thing to bring inflation down is not for the Fed to raise interest rates. It's for Congress and the White House to start taking a chainsaw to this budget in cutting the trillions and trillions of dollars of excess spending. You know, we've spent, since COVID, spent and borrowed about $6 trillion, $4 trillion of that under Biden. It's just overloading the system with all these cheap dollars. And the problem is, it doesn't matter how much the Fed raises interest rates. If you've got this expansive fiscal policy of government just growing and growing and putting all the money, the printing presses on overdrive, you're going to have inflation for a long time to come. So you got to cut the government spending.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to have to leave it there tonight. But Stephen Moore with FreedomWorks, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you.
Well, the president, as you saw in our top story, was weighing in on the economy today and something a little more personal, his age. Mr. Biden turns 80 next month and has been facing questions about fitness to serve for a while now, although those questions are growing even among members of his own party. The president last night responding to critiques about his age and the demands of the job.
About whether or not I can get anything done. Look what I've gotten done. Name me a president in recent history that's gotten as much done as I have in the first 2 years. Not a joke. You may not like what I got done, but the vast majority of the American people do like what I got done.
Mr. Biden's remarks come as polling shows a bipartisan majority of Republicans and Democrats think there should be an age cap on elected officials, most agreeing 80 is too old.
Well, joining us now is Nathan Gonzalez, editor and publisher of Inside Elections. Nathan, as always, thank you so much for coming on Faith Nation tonight. And we want to start by asking you, President Biden's age is an issue that keeps coming up. Now, given the questions around his age and mental health, do you think he is going to run again in 2024? And yesterday we asked the same questions to CBN political analyst David Brody, and he said no. What are your thoughts?
I agree with David in terms of I don't think Biden's going to run again. First of all, I thought you were going to ask me if I was 80, and for the record, I am not 80 years old. But I think his physical, his age, and his political standing are kind of working hand in hand. That if Joe Biden was, he's going to be our first president to serve into his 80s, but if he was at 60% job approval rating, I don't think you would see the same questions being asked. But right now, his disapproval rating is higher than his approval rating. And so there is concern on the Democratic side, not just about his age, but concern that maybe if he runs again, he will help deliver the White House back to the Republicans or even back to former President Trump. And so these two things are working hand in hand. And those collection of things, I don't expect President Biden to run again for president.
Nathan, if you were anywhere near 80, I would have to say you're aging quite well and can offer us all some tips. Along those same lines, though, there's renewed attention on Pennsylvania's Senate race, specifically Democratic candidate John Fetterman's fitness to serve. He did an interview with NBC News that aired yesterday and again this morning, where he used closed captioning to help him understand the questions. Although the reporter said it wasn't clear whether he understood the small talk leading up to the interview. Nathan, how do you think that's going to affect his neck-and-neck race against Dr. Mehmet Oz?
Well, it looks like his recovery, that he's getting better. I mean, if you look at some of he was doing no appearances for a few months, and then now he has been doing more. He was actually just today doing another interview with a newspaper editorial board meeting that was live streamed, and it looked like that went smoothly. So I don't expect this to have a big impact unless during the one debate that is scheduled that something major happens. It really has brought up the conversation, though, about what is fitness for office, and are accommodations such as closed captioning, does that make someone not fit for office? Does someone who is deaf, does that mean that they can't serve in office? And so it's brought up these conversations, and what we're not talking about anymore is the transparency issue. That was initially the question, because Fetterman and the Fetterman campaign was not transparent when he had the stroke before the primary, and I think they downplayed the severity of it. But now that we're a few months away from that, the conversation has really shifted, and this is one of the top races in the entire country.
Now, Nathan, we have about a minute left, but I want to ask you, the president seems to be downplaying possible federal charges being brought against his son, Hunter. How much of a factor is the Hunter Biden story going to be once we get into the 2024 race?
I think the question is, how far are Republicans going to go in investigating Hunter Biden if indeed they win control of the House this year. I think it's clear that they are going to investigate him. And what is the public sentiment or public feeling about that? Because on one hand, Republicans will try to talk about Hunter and his connection to his father and what does that mean financially. But when you listen to President Biden and his phone conversations with Hunter, you can tell that there's a father there who is trying to help his son deal with some very real problems and issues. And so there's both. We're going to have to see when these investigations do come, what is the public feeling about it, and do they think it's relevant, or is it Republicans overplaying their hand?
All right, a young but incredibly wise Nathan Gonzalez with Inside Elections. Nathan, thank you as always.
See you guys. Thank you.
Well, President Biden says his Russian counterpart totally miscalculated when invading Ukraine. Vladimir Putin's renewed attacks could be some of the worst shelling the country has had to endure since the start of the war.
But it's also bolstering the response among Ukraine's allies to provide more aid for its military defense. CBN's Matt Galka joins us now with what the United States and other countries are pledging to do. Matt.
Well, John and Abigail, defense officials from around the world are in Brussels right now discussing what they can do to help Ukraine continue to fend off Russian forces. All of this happening as Vladimir Putin's threat of possible nuclear war still hangs in the air.
I think he thought he was going to be welcomed with open arms, that this has been the home of Mother Russia in Kyiv, and he was going to be welcomed, and I think he just totally miscalculated.
President Biden told CNN he thought Russian President Putin completely underestimated how war with Ukraine would go as battle between the two countries continues into the 8th month. The president added he believes Putin was a, quote, rational actor who had irrational objectives. He also clarified his comments about Armageddon as Russia continues to threaten the use of a tactical nuclear weapon.
The idea that a world leader of one of the largest nuclear powers in the world says he may use a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and the whole point I was making was it could lead to just a horrible outcome. And not because anybody intends to turn it into a world war or anything, but it just, once you use a nuclear weapon, the mistakes that can be made, the miscalculations, who knows what would happen.
The comments come as the war seems to be intensifying. Ukraine accused Russia of targeting and killing civilians in Kyiv with heavy missile strikes this week. Putin said it was in response to a massive bridge explosion in Crimea, cutting off a major supply artery for Russia.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley joined dozens of other defense officials in Brussels this week to discuss how to continue arming the Ukrainian resistance. The focus now is on air defense as a harsh and potentially bloody winter approaches.
I expect that Ukraine will continue to do everything it can throughout the winter to regain its territory and to be effective on the battlefield. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they have what's required to be effective.
Now, President Biden also told CNN he doesn't expect Putin to actually use a nuclear weapon. He also didn't expect to meet with him at a G20 summit next month in Indonesia unless Putin wanted to talk about freeing imprisoned basketball star Brittany Griner. Guys.
All right, thanks, Matt Galko. Well, coming up, calls for justice against China's genocide of Uyghurs as their future hangs in the balance.
Welcome back. Protesting against genocide in China, exiled Uyghur Muslims did just that today outside the State Department as the communist regime continues their crackdown on religious minorities. The persecuted protesters are calling on the U.S. government to take stronger action to help end China's genocide of Uyghurs and Turkic people.
We plead with all the nations in the free world, especially the U.S. government, who are truly committed to ending the ongoing genocide in East Turkestan, to address the issue at its roots by officially condemning Chinese occupation of East Turkestan and supporting East Turkestan's efforts to regain its rightful independence.
A recent United Nations report claimed China's treatment of Uyghur and other Muslim minorities could constitute crimes against humanity. The exact number is unknown, but upwards of 1.5 million religious minorities are being detained in what China calls vocational and educational training centers.
And for more, let's bring in Sully Hudayar, who advocates for East Turkestan's independence as the region's prime minister in exile. Sully, can you help us better understand the dire situation Uyghurs and other religious minorities in the region face under China's control?
Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples are not a minority in East Turkestan. They're actually the majority. But in the past 8 years, since 2014, the Chinese government has been engaging in a brutal campaign of mass internment and genocide, forcing Uyghurs to undergo forced indoctrination, be used as essentially slave labor in Chinese factories, and forced to give up their very, culture, their religion, their identity, even to the point that the Chinese government is engaging in forced sterilization of Uyghur and other Turkic women, harvesting the organs of Uyghurs and selling them as so-called halal organs to Muslim countries. Everything that China is doing constitutes as genocide as defined under the UN Genocide Convention.
Mm-hmm. And Sully, do you feel that the Uyghur people and other victims of Chinese repression have been abandoned by the United States and the world?
Absolutely. The latest, vote at the UN Human Rights Council shows that, the international community doesn't really care about human rights, let alone, stopping genocide, because it was a vote on allowing a debate on the issue.
Finally, for those who may not fully understand, why does the Chinese government target Uyghurs, and what are you calling on the United States and others to do to help stop the persecution?
Well, the persecution started back in 1949, on October 12, 1949, when the PLA invaded East Turkestan. The root cause of this is Chinese occupation of East Turkestan and the Chinese government's efforts to ensure that East Turkestan becomes a so-called forever part of China. So we're urging the U.S. and other governments to recognize the fact that East Turkestan is an occupied country and to support it to regain its rightful independence.
Mm-hmm. And we have just about 30 seconds left, but I want to ask you, a recent UN report on China's treatment of the Uyghurs refrained from using the term genocide, even though what China is doing fits the UN's definition of genocide. Do you think the UN caved to pressure from China?
Absolutely. They not only caved to pressure from China, but the Chinese have been very extensively buying influence at the UN, whether it's through the UN as a system or through the votes of individual countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sully Hudayar, founder of the East Turkestan National Awakening, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, and we'll be right back. And welcome back. A new pro-life measure in Georgia is giving parents more to look forward to than just a newborn.
It recognizes life as soon as a heartbeat is detected, and as Charlene Aaron reports, also lets taxpayers claim embryos as dependents on their state taxes.
Following the Supreme Court's ruling overturning Roe, the Georgia Department of Revenue announced that residents can claim a personal exemption of $3,000 for each unborn child. Opponents argue the move opens up a host of problems, while supporters say it's creating a culture of life in the state.
The new rule, called the Living Infants Fairness and Equality Act, or LIFE, recognizes an embryo as a human life as soon as a heartbeat is detected. The Georgia State Revenue Department offers this guidance. A taxpayer who has an unborn child or children on or after July 20th through December 31st, 2022, with a detectable human heartbeat may claim a dependent personal exemption in the amount of $3,000 for each unborn child on their 2022 tax return. The department goes on to say that similar to other deductions, relevant medical records must be provided to support the dependent claim. Abortion proponents are slamming the policy. Lauren Growargo, manager of Stacey Abrams' gubernatorial campaign, tweeted, "So what happens when you claim your fetus as a dependent and then miscarry later in the pregnancy? You get investigated both for tax fraud and an illegal abortion?" While the Revenue Department has not clarified whether the law would apply to miscarriages, pro-lifers applaud the move. Elizabeth Reed is leadership director of Georgia Life Alliance, a group which lobbied legislators to approve the measure.
I think this act and then other measures that we have worked really hard on here in Georgia provide a lot of wraparound services and support to the women who need it most, who are facing a crisis in their pregnancy.
Reed hopes it shows struggling expectant mothers that there is help.
Even if, the baby's father is not supportive, or maybe they don't have a supportive family network or support system, they're not alone. That they're going to have one through the pro-life movement, through the church, and through the state.
Pastor Garland Hunt of the Father's House in Norcross, Georgia, agrees.
That child is a person that's growing in what should be the most protected place for a child to grow is inside that mother's womb. So certainly any provision that can help a mother be a mother, I think is a good thing.
Meanwhile, Reed is hopeful other states will adopt similar policies.
I really am encouraged by all the attention that we're getting across the nation about this law. I think that that's making, the case for our compelling interest in protecting and supporting life in the womb.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News, Atlanta.
Welcome back. Finally tonight, it's not an end-of-the-world movie, but it almost sounds like one. A NASA mission to redirect an asteroid away from Earth deemed a success.
That's right, the mission, codenamed DART, which stands for Double Asteroid Redirection Test. NASA's Save the World spacecraft plowed into an asteroid about 7 million miles away, sending it clear out of Earth's orbit. NASA took the opportunity to praise the international accomplishment.
Now, this is a watershed moment for planetary defense and a watershed moment for humanity.
The planetary defense mission launched 2 weeks ago to see if a killer rock could be altered. While this asteroid wasn't considered a threat, NASA's administrator says the mission shows that it's trying to prepare for whatever the universe throws at us.
NASA's making a lot of news these days.
Why? Busy. Thanks so much for watching.
We'll see you tomorrow.